What's the scariest or strangest thing you've seen in a national park or national forest? I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided not to. It was off-season, and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided that I needed to get in that water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out in the direction I would need to leave, and started hiking through thick brush, down an embankment, to the edge of the water. There was no path. It was a pretty rugged area. It was mid-fall and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming, so I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my bra and underwear. I had a nice swim, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I was in the middle of nowhere. After about 5 minutes, the creepy feeling was enough for me to want to head back, so I started to climb out, turned my back to the other side of the river, and walked toward my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I turned around, there was a big, tall man standing in plain view, just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on his embankment than I was on mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he had been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other, me in frozen terror, for what felt like forever, when all of a sudden he frantically took off in the direction of the footbridge leading across the water. I grabbed my car key, tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything and went running for my life through the thick brush and blackberries, barefoot in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge toward me rapidly. I got to my car and flung my door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking and crying. Had I hesitated for literally 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing this story out again all these years later, I am starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it. I will never, ever go back to that area. Since that moment, I always bring a hiking buddy with me when I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for life. I have had many years of therapy, and that experience is still as vivid as the day it happened. 2 friends and I made a road trip out to Utah to see the national parks. We live in Virginia and set out for the 2-week trip in my truck. They don't ride. One of our stops was Canyonlands National Park, where we had permits to drive and camp on the White Rim Road. For those that don't know, the WRR is a 100-mile off-road loop that circles island in the sky. It is pretty gnarly in some sections, and very remote, with little cell service. Anyway, we had made it to our camp for the night, but had many hours of daylight left, so we decided to explore a little more, as we had heard the road was flooded out a little further. It was also 106*F that day, and the AC in the truck seemed a better option than sitting around camp. We made it less than a mile down the road when we came across an overturned BMW GS in the middle of a sandy wash. We ran over to help when we saw its rider laying on his back next to it. His helmet was off, jacket unzipped. He was foaming at the mouth, barley breathing, pale, pupils dilated, and totally unresponsive. I started what first aid I could, but he just stopped breathing while I was holding him. I tried to clear his airway and thought about trying CPR, but I knew it would be a lost cause. All I could think to do was get help. I left my friends there with water and supplies and raced back up the canyon to try and find help. At this point, we were about 12 miles from what was at one time a paved road and another 30 from any faint signs of civilization. After about 40 minutes of driving, having reached the partially paved road, I was able to get enough signal to call 911. I waited there until help arrived, in case 911 operators needed more info. As I waited, a Jeep flew by me. It was only after I had descended back into the canyon with the medics that I learned it was the rider's father, brother, and a third member of the group. I think he was an uncle. As we later learned and pieced together, the group was traveling internationally. The downed rider had not been doing well. He was getting tired, not able to handle the bike, so they left him in the shade, about a quarter mile from where we found him. Their plan was to ride out, go to Moab, rent a jeep, and retrieve him. I can only assume that in the rider's panic or delirium he tried to ride out on his own and made it as far as where we found him. 2 paramedics and trucks, and a rescue helicopter were dispatched, the helicopter arriving shortly after the family made it back, and before me and the other paramedics made it back down. But it was all for naught. The rider didn't make it. He had a body temp of 110. I believe extreme heat and dehydration were what did it in the end. I guess I'm sharing this for a few reasons. Admittedly, it gets easier for me to process every time I share it. I'm not that old, 26, and I have never experienced anything like this in my life. But as a fellow adventure rider, it really hit close to home. I remember my first moto camping trip less than 3 years ago. A short trip on the Blue Ridge Parkway by myself. Of course I was nervous, and I thought of all the bad things that could happen. Theft, running off the road, getting hit by some idiot in a car, maybe even a bear. But I never really stopped to think just how quickly something as simple as the environment can sneak up on you. I've always tried to be prepared for the worst, but this will make me double my efforts. The words of one of the first responders still ring in my head. Mother Nature isn't cruel, she isn't evil, she is just unforgiving. Anyway, before my next trip, especially my next solo one, I will heavily be considering an in-reach device or something similar. And I hope other riders will also. And most importantly, ride safe, be safe, and remember a fellow explorer who in my mind truly embodied the life we all love so much. First time ever camping, it was for a field trip in 7th grade. God, I was miserable and I hated it, and I didn't want to be away from home. It was about 5 hours away. I couldn't sleep, so I got up in the middle of the night and walked outside, and I sat with a little book light to read in front of the cabin. I was so obsessed with Christopher Pike at that age. Holy shit. Anyway, I was super unnerved, but I couldn't stand going back into that cabin and laying on this stupid, awful wooden manger-type cot, so I stayed right there by the door. I had this weird feeling like I was being watched, but felt safe enough because it was camp. But every now and then, I just couldn't stop glancing up. It just felt weird. I can't explain it. Like hair on the back of your neck standing up weird. I guess I happened to move my book just right because the light caught on a pair of glowing eyes, like an animal, right in front of me. As a kid, I felt like they were right in front of me but must have been down the steps and a few yards back. Because I dropped the book and the light fell off to the side, I could just barely see that it was a goddamn mountain lion. I couldn't even see the full thing at first, just a paw. But then I followed it up. It saw me, and I saw it, and I could not move. In my mind, I knew 2 things. 1, if I didn't move, someone was going to find a blood trail, and then my half-eaten corpse. And 2, if I got attacked by a mountain lion because I was doing something I wasn't supposed to, my dad would be so mad. I have no idea how long I fumbled. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like 10 years. I reached up behind me until I found the door handle and twisted until I fell into the cabin backward. Closed the door and got back into my stupid bed and laid there until sunrise. One girl woke up and I just told her the wind must have made the door bang. In the morning, our teacher came to wake us up and I got in trouble for leaving my library book outside. I didn't want to get in even more trouble, so I didn't tell anyone what happened. This happened on private property, but it's a creepy story that took place in the woods, so it kind of qualifies. Plus, this morning was opening day for deer season and we were deer hunting when it happened. My cousin owns land in western Wisconsin, where there's lots of hills and lots of deer. It's tradition for all of us to hunt on his property. My dad, cousin, and all their friends pitched in to build a hunting shack on the property and put up tree stands. We hunt on a schedule, so none of us hunt in the same area at the same time, both for our safety and in hopes of getting a deer. My dad and I took an ATV and headed up a hillside. The sun wasn't quite up yet, and we wanted to get set for sunrise. We marked which hill we were going up on the schedule inside the hunting shack. Nobody else was there yet, but we marked it anyways in case my cousin and his daughter showed up. We waited until about 9 a.m. and didn't see a thing, not even as much as a squirrel. We decided to go get some coffee to warm up and then head back out. I followed my dad down the path back to the ATV, and we'd stop every so often to listen for deer. The only noises I heard were my footsteps and my dad's. About halfway to the ATV, I heard something else. It only happened when my dad and I walked. When my dad and I walk during deer hunting, I mimic his footsteps so we make less noise. I step at the same time as him. However, something behind me was making noise. It was like something was mimicking Amy's footsteps. I spun around and peered into the trees. The sun still wasn't over the top of the hill yet, so we were in quite a bit of shade. I didn't see anything, so I continued to follow my dad down the hill. But I heard it again. This time I turned around when we were still walking, and I saw something duck behind a tree. A pale face poked out from about 30 yards up the hill and hid behind the tree again. It poked out again, and this time stayed staring down at us. I stopped and hit my dad's shoulder. He turned and saw it too. "Get to the four-wheeler," he whispered, and I didn't hesitate. I stared it down as my dad started up the ATV, and as we departed, the face's dark little shoulder came out from behind the tree, followed by the rest of its gnarled, malformed body. My dad hit the throttle, and we got back to the hunting shack as soon as we could. Nobody else was there, so we got in the truck and left. I haven't been in those woods since. My dad was, and got a deer this morning. And acts like this never happened. I still think about it far too often. There's a national park a few hours drive from us that my family likes to camp in every year. We usually drive down old logging roads and find random locations to camp in instead of using the campground. It's more private, and we found some awesome spots over the years. When I was 13, we found a really cool spot nestled between two large ponds. You follow this logging road for a few miles, and then it slowly starts to turn into overgrowth. Lots of little hills and downed trees, tall weeds, etc. At the time, we didn't have a vehicle capable of four-wheel drive, so we lugged our gear on foot and set up on the hill between the ponds. Everything went smoothly until about 2 a.m. Out of nowhere, two massive black trucks came roaring in. These trucks were literal clown cars, jam-packed with dudes. They completely ignored our camp, completely ignored our family, asking WTF they were doing so late, didn't pay us any mind at all. They all got out of the trucks, waded into the ponds with nets, spent a little over an hour kidnapping frogs, piled back into their trucks, and left with the frogs from the pond. They did this completely silently, no lights, no talking, just quietly walking through the pond, skimming nets along. When we arrived, the ponds were overrun with frogs, and listening to them all was really cool. After the frog kidnapping, the ponds were silent and still. The following morning, we found a lone survivor with an injured leg and returned him to the pond. But the ponds stayed silent the rest of the camping trip. Frog isn't a terribly popular dish around here, but I assume they took the frogs to eat. The silent abductors were super strange though. You'd think they'd be like, "Whoa, hey, sorry to intrude, just frog hunting," or that they'd at least use flashlights. We've camped that spot a few times since then, and we've never encountered the frog kidnappers again. The following year, same park but different spot, we got robbed by a bear. Someone left an open pack of marshmallows in the beer cooler and didn't shut the lid correctly. We woke up sometime in the very early morning hours to see a black bear casually carrying off our cooler. That morning we did recover the cooler, but the marshmallows were gone and he squished a few beer cans in the process of his theft. Drove up the east coast of Australia with some mates to camp in national parks and get ludicrously intoxicated. We brought with us a grog shop's worth of booze, bags of weed, and several handfuls of magic mushroom caps. Since I wasn't driving, I decided to eat 8 of the caps before we even left our border. By the time we entered the national park and started setting up our campsite, the sun was already setting and I was already hallucinating, meaning I was a completely unhelpful but hilarious mess of a camper. Cue grilling over the fire, drinking whiskey, and smoking gigantic doobs. At around midnight, my normal bodily functions returned in earnest, and we realized that we hadn't even looked for a dunny, shitter, outhouse, long drop before it got dark. So I grabbed a roll of shit tickets, turned on my headlamp, clutched a gigantic hunting knife between my teeth, and strolled 100 or so meters to take a dump in the river. Imagine a drug-crazed man with his pants around his ankles, squatting on a riverbank clutching a gigantic fuck-off hunting knife between his teeth, with the light from his headlamp darting around the darkness. Everywhere I pointed the light, I would see rotten, decrepit zombies shambling out of the bush around the riverbank. Never have I defecated so quickly, all the while hyperventilating and freaking out about the hallucinatory undead coming to feast on my flesh. After I got back to the campsite, the night went as well as any drug-fueled campout goes. Woke up the next morning, stepped out of my tent to take a piss only to find a public toilet block not 50 meters from our campsite. I have never laughed harder at myself than I did that morning. And that's the story of the most terrifying shit I've ever taken. In a national park, no less. I live next to 2 national forests/parks. From June to July, there was a horrific fire that prompted evacuations. My family had about 3 hours to pack anything of value. Luckily, we didn't end up having to evacuate, so I had just gotten off of work, and so had my dad. I told them we should really consider evacuating. They didn't take my advice at first, but then we saw the mountain burning. First thing I did was get all of our legal documents, birth certificates, medical files, etc. That took about a half an hour. Next, I helped my sister pack and get through her panic attacks. She was 8 at the time. It was absolutely heart-wrenching having to tell her that we can't take all of her stuffed animals, and she had to pack only a few. I had to talk her out of only bringing her stuffed animals. I ended up packing a lot for her because she was just so fucking sad. She ended up settling on a few of her favorites, and an elephant stuffed animal she got from an ambulance when she was 4. Next, I checked on my other sister. She was oddly calm. She packed everything she wanted into a small bag, and that was it. I went to help my parents, but they told me to go pack my stuff. I ended up packing some expensive stuff, like my purse collection. I also packed important items and my artwork, and then had a mental breakdown. It was summer, and I was on the top floor. I ended up overheating, and yeah, it was bad. Next was packing animal stuff. At the time, we had 12 hens, 2 guinea pigs, and 2 dogs. We packed food for everyone and started getting stuff together. Harnesses, water bottles, food, bedding, hay, etc. By now, the fire was halfway down the mountain. I grabbed the guinea pigs and put them in their transport cage, put them by the door. My dad took a trailer from his boss. I wasn't allowed to help take anything outside, as I have life-threatening asthma and it would have been bad. Anyway, we eventually got everything moved/taken out, and by then it was night. The fire had gotten to the base of the mountain on one side. We were all exhausted. I asked my parents if we could leave, but they said not yet. I have no idea how I fell asleep, but my sisters and I all slept next to the front door that night. It was very mesmerizing. I have no idea why, but I was in a trance. It was midnight, but the flames from the burning mountain lit up the sky. It was, in a very eerie and haunting way, almost beautiful. The orange flames and purple smoke and the moonlight. Awful to say, I know, but it was like a painting. Anyway, about 2 a.m., I fell asleep. I read myself to sleep and watched the fire creep towards us. I woke up several times and thought I was dreaming, but gradually the flames were being put out. I woke up very early, at about 6 a.m. The mountain was still burning, but the 1,000-foot flames were completely gone. I woke everyone up, and we were all so grateful. A few of us were crying from joy. Several local fire departments had set up a fire line that night. That's what saved us. In the end, nobody died. A local firefighter was severely burned, but he's since recovered and is attending physical therapy. He was released from the hospital about a month or 2 ago. The night before we were prepping for evacuation, a bucket helicopter crashed. Again, nobody died. One house and several government buildings were burned. In total, about 35,000 acres were burned. That's the most horrific thing I think I've ever seen, though. I think the reason we were so affected by this is because we have had a house fire before. We were so lucky that this time we got to pack and rescue our animals. Rip Lady, you were the best lil dog. Also, R.I.P. Thunder. My poor bird passed away from a horrible accident. R.I.P. Rex, our fox. I work at an animal sanctuary, who died of heat stroke and heart attack from the fire. You'll all be missed. Not even 6 months ago. My husband, my 10-year-old bonus son, he just turned 11, myself and our dog, went on a some family road trip from Portland, Oregon, the area we live, to Mount St. Helens, on the outskirts of Courage, WA. We drove around and just kind of veered off at random down a road that looked like it may have potential hiking areas. We ended up parked at the beginning on this blocked off road where only foot traffic could carry on. We started at the very bottom of the mountain, passed by a few people that were walking back towards us in the opposite direction. As we started to walk further, they gave us a shout out that any further was patched of unmelted snow and patched ice, to which we carried on anyways, without us, as a family, really have a plan. We looked on a map on our phone and realized we were on a trailhead that lead up to Climber's Bivouac, so we decided that would be our turnaround spot. Not thinking anything of it, it's a 3-mile hike. Regardless of it being a bit of a stretch, we still had a very fun and joyful time. As we got higher though, and closer to Climber's Bivouac, the ice/snow was getting deeper, and for the most part throughout the first 2/3 of the way, was only in shaded areas. The last 1/3 of the hike, however, and especially after reaching our turnaround spot, the snow/ice was over 5 feet deep, and we were having to carefully push through since we had accidentally stepped in some soft spots that pulled our legs in, so it was very tedious. After turning around and starting to make our way back down, I had noticed that our dog had suddenly become closer and more at our sides, making way back. This threw me off, because the entire way up he was running ahead, around, playing, and just loving life freely, and a little more ahead of us. But I thought nothing of it. I was and still am fully aware that up in that area there is mountain lions and other sorts of predators that are known to us, and I'm sensible enough to know predators not for sure known to us. So I immediately realized our dog was on alert about something. But he seemed to just be going along up ahead with my husband as my son and myself tailed a little behind. That one we heard it the first time. From the brush, trees, and wilderness about 20 to 25 feet behind us, to my guess, we heard something pound on the ground and let out an ape-like noise. Ooh, ooh, like almost the same noise gorillas will make on National Geographic when they are giving off a territory warning, but a little different, a lot deeper, and more sinister. My son and I froze, looking at my husband and furry companion for reassurance. With my voice shaking, I asked my husband, "Did you hear that?" He replied in a reassuring manner, "Oh, that was Spike," he started gauging and was gasping after. Spike was our dog. I questioned it, knowing for certain what I had heard and from what direction, not only to mention I've seen my dog get gagged or sick plenty before, and had never heard him make a noise like that. Regardless of my questioning, I believed him. We continued along, briefly feeling reassurance, until we heard it again, but a huge problem being, it was closer. I'm talking no more than 6 to 10 feet off to my right, into the brush of wilderness. This time, I just so happened to be focused on my dog at the time, watching his movements, and now I knew for certain my husband had lied for the sake of keeping us calm. This was not even half a mile of our way back down, so we had just a little over 2.5 miles left to go. The remainder of our way down, we heard nothing but some branches snapping. But based on my dog's behavior, whatever it was, followed us the majority of the way down, leaving us be about a quarter mile from our car. I will never forget that day. And I promise you, especially after that event, I never go out in the wild without packing something.